Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, a show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Chris Duffin. Now, I've had some heavyweights on this show, but no one fits that description as literally as Chris does. He's an inspirational speaker and best-selling author of The Ego and the Dragon, a story of strength and reinvention. But Chris is also the only man in history to squat and deadlift 1,000 pounds, which makes him arguably one of the strongest men in the world. It's not often I talk to someone who could genuinely kill me with his bare hands, so I'm a little relieved that I'm recording this one remotely. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Duffin. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Well, as we were starting, we were trying to get the cameras to work, and your camera zoomed in on you. And trust me, you're big enough as it is. That didn't do anything for my level of tranquility. To give people an idea of what type of book you wrote and what type of stories you're telling in there, I would love for you to just pick one or two that you think give a clear flavor of the type of craziness that's in there.
Okay. Yeah. And, it's great to understand first, it's not just an autobiography and stories. Like if you're working through it, like every chapter is this driving people through this process of kind of their own internal self-reflection and towards this piece that then helps arrive at some goal setting. But it's an interesting ride. So the book opens actually, I think the first chapter is about me at 6 years old, and we're living in the Northern California wilderness. And when I say that, I mean, not in a home. We've got beams lashed to the trees, up in the trees, and that's where our bedding is because we're just out in the wilderness living on a creek. And I'm 6 years old, and at the time I'm being taught how to capture live rattlesnakes and handle them and kill them, because that is the environment that I live in. So, sitting there, imagine 6 years old, you've got a stick that you're teasing a rattlesnake with, getting it to strike, and then reaching out, capturing it behind the head with the branches on that stick and picking it up. And you're sitting there with this cold, slithery snake just wrapping around your arm. And you got the eyes just kind of staring up into you. And, just how to hold it, all these things at 6 years old, you're learning to manage fear, to manage these things, because if you let that take over, you're done. But at the same time, you can't be careless. And this is it's about learning not to be reckless, but it's just how do you end up in that environment? It's a pretty crazy ride. So there's stories of, drug trafficking and serial killer, and also it's a good ride. It's a good ride.
Yeah, you mentioned that one now, and this is the type of thing that I think to most people just sounds completely alien. Now, the snakes I can kind of get, not being 6 and being taught that, but I've known a lot of people who grew up in a farm, and that these animals are a natural part of their daily life. But there's this particular story you tell where I think it was your stepfather that was always drinking with some guy that was also up in the mountain, and you always went with him. And then at one day, your stepfather said you couldn't go anymore, and you didn't really know what was going on. And then he went a few more times, and then one day you had to stay at home because the police was coming to pick up this guy who had killed someone.
Well, when you're living on the fringes of society, as we were, my parents didn't want to really be part of kind of this normal world, right? You're going to run into people that are literally hiding for those reasons as well. And a lot of times you're surrounded by kind of, some unsavory characters or things happening around you that fall outside the norm, without a doubt.
That was probably not even the only murderer in the story.
No, it was not.
that guy had killed one person. That
Yeah.
was not the real
Yeah.
dangerous
Yeah.
chap.
Yep.
So one of the things that I really liked about how you laid out the book and how you told those stories is that I think right at the beginning you say something, you deal with what's perhaps an objection that a lot of people are going to have reading this type of stories, which I think what you said was that no doubt your story is going to be very different than my story, but this is not about living in the woods. It's about feeling like an outsider, because obviously you guys were up in the mountain and there were cities next to you and you were not part of a lot of everything else that was going on around you. But apart from saying stuff like that, you mostly let the stories do the talking. It's not like a little anecdote and then you're going on about it for 20 pages. It's almost the opposite. Like, if anything, your thoughts and your insights on it are almost an afterthought to the stories. Now I can imagine there was a temptation at some point where someone maybe suggested you should make this into more of a how-to book instead of what you did. So why did you go down the road you went down?
I think it's really important, at least for me. I don't want to tell people or get to this point of like where I'm telling people how to live, it's more of a process of guiding, in my opinion. And so the storytelling piece was really important, and just talking through how those things impacted me. And I didn't need to spend pages walking through the details of that. Interestingly enough, it is a bestseller in like those self-improvement and human psychology areas as well. But we all have to arrive at our own, personal truths, our own values. And I thought the story was a great framework for that. And that's why I've wanted to write that book for decades, but I didn't really feel it had an ending. And I really needed to kind of live that through my life to pull that to a greater conclusion. And I've had reached that around, the time of writing this book. Obviously, our stories always continue to go on, but I was able to draw the pieces that I felt necessary to have some impact on people's own lives in their own businesses, their entrepreneurial visions, their family, all these sorts of things, to really draw some big change and be able to articulate that in this story.
I find it interesting that you say that, sort of ironically, that this is a bestseller in the sort of self-help type of category, even though you're not telling people what to do and how to live their lives. But I guess that the only reason we can say that that's in any way ironic is because we've lost touch of that way of teaching people, that way of showing people a different way of doing things, which is essentially just sharing a story. It's become more about telling people than showing people. And again, this is what I do on a day-to-day basis now, which is try and convince people that this is not the right, that your approach is the right approach. Show, if you want to top or tail the story with something to make sure that the point is clear, by all means do that, but let the story do the talking. Don't preach.
I've often used this tactic actually in the business world. I'm coaching a leader on it right now. Is so many people, they get lost in like trying to be this great leader that can stand up in front and motivate everybody and articulate this vision, this strategy, this plan. And a lot of times, like, organizational behavior and change comes from these one-on-one interactions of telling these stories to people. And it's telling the story of where we're going to be as a company, right? Or what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like to this individual, and helping, and in that story, weaving in their role, their environment into this, and that continual one-on-one. And that's how you really like get people engaged and understanding and buying in and being part of this change, is these little micro stories that you can walk around and tell all the time. And people, like, they think it's laying out this big strategy on paper. It's these series of meetings and all this other like business jargon and stuff that you can learn in, a variety of different, leadership and organizational behavior books. And I try to get across the point. It's not that. It's actually just these small micro communications and weaving these stories to an individual level. And that's why you've got to go out. You can't just go paint one picture in front of a big, a couple hundred people, because that story, those people aren't all going to be able to connect with themselves.
This is another part of stories like yours that I think I know the answer. I have a pretty good feeling about what you might say, but I wanted to hear from you. Isn't there a risk that when someone who looks like you, who has done the things you've done, and who has a story that is very far from the ordinary, at least from the experience we've had, isn't there a risk that to a lot of people, both the story and you become very difficult to relate to?
I think that there is, without a doubt, on the out front, right? So that's perception. Like, I look like a large and intimidating individual. Actually, I'm down like 50 pounds right now from
Chris, you are a large and intimidating individual. You don't look like what you are.
And that's perception, right? You're going to walk in, you're going to have some of that immediate impact on people. But that's where, being able to paint those pictures can really help people on that individual level. Because again, to people around, if you've done amazing, you've done all this stuff, it's just so over the top, people can't connect to it. And so in my book, same thing. That's why I try to relate this back to everything, these pieces that we all deal with. You were talking about the introduction to the book, where I'm sitting up on this rock with my childhood friend, and we're looking at the towns in the distance and seeing the lights and going, I wonder what that's like, what they have in those homes, what amazing gadgets and what that life is like as we're living in the hills with no connection to it. Most people have no connection to like what that experience is, but I frame it up front about that discussion about being an outsider and how that affects your ability to potentially connect to people. And so those are the things, understand that that's the commonality and the common themes that you're going to be able to broach with someone else and get them into that. And then you can create a story that really brings that out. They may not be able to connect to that story personally, but they can experience the story and the storytelling and understand the theme that they can connect with in those aspects. So when I talk about, achieving and throwing yourself into in areas of that you're not an expert, this unknown, to be able to learn and chase this gap, to when you're scared of something, to go, I'm all in. And I can talk about the stories about the things that I've accomplished. And it's like, okay, Chris, yeah, you built like world-class, companies and worked in aerospace and on, all the, like, lifted 1,000 pounds, all this stuff. But you can relate that back going to anyone. It could be someone going back to school because they've been afraid of, I want to go get my bachelor's degree, but I'm afraid of, stepping away from my work environment and what the risk is going to be for my family. You can start taking these stories and weaving it back into these very relatable pieces to people. The same theme can all, it can be about this difficult conversation I want to have with my sister. That, she's doing something in her life, or, it's impacting me in a way that's causing my gut to churn up. I don't want to approach it, and saying, no, that's the signal for you to go and have that conversation. And that's your opportunity to become, this stronger version of yourself, the better, and be able to approach, like, take those signals and do those things. Because it doesn't matter the level that you take it to. They're all things that we can deal with and work with on a daily basis in the world. And so it's being able to take those themes of the stories and tie that back in examples to things that everybody can deal with. But I understand what you're saying.
I don't feel that, but I put myself in a position of some people that might. I think, as you're saying, you call in these themes. I tend to think of it more as, what's the core emotion of the story? What's the emotional tone of the story? So if it's a story about not belonging, it might be a story about just being afraid of doing something. It might be a story about some goal that proves something to you. So to you, that might have been 1,000-pound deadlift. Whereas to me, that might be something completely different. Might be, I don't know, speaking in front of 5,000 people. So, whatever it is, I think some people, if they don't have the chance to experience the story and pay attention to it and listen to it carefully, sometimes all they see is the external part of the story, which is, living in the woods or, lifting these incredibly heavy weights. But behind that, there is a genuine human emotion that most people can relate to. And I think perhaps that's the challenge of the storyteller, is to get that core, that theme across, even if the outer casing seems completely foreign to most people.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put that, Francisco, is the emotion. And maybe that's where I'm driving at when I say theme, but yeah, that getting that connection to that piece so that people have that feel that you're going for, and can connect to that.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because you said earlier that you've been meaning to write the stories for a long time. So the book came out not that long ago, right? So a few years ago,
like 2 years ago.
So what I wanted to understand is, you've done a lot in business, and obviously the stories have had a very big impact on you. But how much do anyone working with you, particularly in the early part of your career, how much did how much they know the stuff? Like, were these stories you already used to communicate to people when you were much younger, or did this come with time?
It came with time, being able to really talk about it, honestly. So when I started opening up and telling the stories, people were quite surprised that had known me through my life, going, "Oh my God, I had no idea. I always knew that there was something different like this, with your background, but you never talked about it." And so it's really been an incredible process of hearing that. And now I've been hearing it personally, because there's actually a documentary in process around this, where the producer's going around and interviewing all these people from throughout my life. And
that would be interesting.
And hearing the stories and the feedback, the impressions, and all this stuff is been pretty wild experience. And realizing, just how much I actually really held a lot of that back during most of my life, honestly.
Yeah, because this is what I find sometimes difficult to understand, in particular in cases like yours, because you've done a lot of sort of leadership type of roles, and you're involved with turning businesses around, and it must have hampered your communication to some degree, that all of this personal experience you had, you perhaps didn't feel comfortable to let that come through. So when you were speaking to people, a lot of what you're bringing to the table, they could only see the results of that and never the origin of that. So
yeah,
to me, it feels like, well, if you couldn't use those experiences, then it feels like it would have been a lot harder for you to communicate with people, because you're holding a lot of that back.
It's been very interesting, because I've been able to actually see that in practice, because through the course of my career, a lot of people have ended up following me, from organization to organization. And now I've got 4 different companies that I own. And some of the people in the core company, Kabuki Strength, which is it's pretty large, like in its field, it's a globally recognized brand. And I've got some people on staff, and they came to work with me after I'd made this transition to entrepreneurship and started up the companies. And this one individual, he's my engineering manager, came to work for me, and he'd been in similar roles for me in the past for over the last 15 years. And he starts working with me, and then I hear from that he's asking a couple of the other staff members, he's like, "What did you do to Chris?" He's so there's so much more emotion, other things in the past, I was very much this almost robotic. I was very authentic, but I never wore any sort of emotion on things. And so that has actually some positives and negatives with it from a leadership perspective. So, being this person with literally showing no emotions, trying to hide some of this. And I think that was part of trying to hide some of my stories and things where I came from, people always knew exactly who and what they were going to get, versus a little bit more of, the ebb and flow of my life and how things feel, and essentially wearing a little bit more of myself on my sleeve to be visible, to be vulnerable, to be able to share these experiences and how they affect me. And because some of this is pretty powerful, traumatic pieces, and if I share these things and I walk through it, it can be a very emotional piece for me. And so it's interesting seeing that change, and not all of it is necessarily positive, which is maybe not what you would expect. But the bigger piece is the significant amount of more buy-in. People like in my organizations are they're here for a mission. Like there's values for the organization and things that we're actually trying to accomplish in the world to make it better. And there's a reason behind that. And people are on that. That's what they're here for, not for a job, not to work for a good leader, not to it is here to be part of this. And that's the part of, wearing those things on my sleeve of why we do the things and why we walk in the world the way that we do.
Yeah, so perhaps trying to stretch the story metaphor over a few too many things, but they've bought into whatever story you decided is the story of your company. And this is something, when I talk to people in corporations, the one thing that they don't necessarily understand is it's very different to be part of anything, but particularly a company where you spend a lot of your time. And if there is no story, or the story that the company tells is kind of boring, or it doesn't have any higher calling. It's like, oh, we want to be the leaders in our market. Like, who cares? It's like the leader in your market. Who cares about that? You're never going to wake up excited about being in, I don't know, whatever. I'm in a software company that is now the leader in our space. Okay, great. And does that fill you with what? I don't know. Pride, maybe? But
yeah. And at times, or even if it is, it becomes cliche. It's just like this thing we say, and it's these words on the wall, but nobody feels it, nobody lives it as part of their day to day. Nobody's walking that walk, really. It's words on a wall, right? The negatives are, maybe I'm not as good one-on-one with my leadership abilities and things if I'm wearing a little bit more of that emotion on my skin, where people can feel the ups and downs of this. But at the same time, I don't have to do as much of that. I don't have to be that person present and at that, the perfect capacity all the time. I'm actually not even in an operating role in any of my companies. I'm not the CEO. I'm not in those positions I was in before.
So you're just a pretty face now.
I'm just a pretty face. Well, I kind of missed that part too. But I call myself like Chief Visionary Officer,
which is a pretty cool job title.
Yeah, but the thing is, at the other side, I don't need to be, because people are so passionate. They live and breathe what we do, and if the job needs done, they're working. Nobody asks somebody to come in, and work crazy hours or work through the weekend on a project, or just be so passionate or engaged about what we're doing and having so much ownership to make sure, and following through and working through, difficult and challenging issues as a team when maybe they're, at odds on how to get to the end goal together, even though they agree on, we're all trying to get this same thing. And, it becomes less political. It becomes less, these other things just fall away, and you have so much passion. Like I said, it's literally people live and breathe it. So like the things that we really value it in Kabuki kind of bleed over into this like continuous improvement type feeling, this trying to always be this better version of yourself. And it's crazy. People will come into the company and like their employees will walk up and say, "Hey, I see you're smoking cigarettes. You know what? I'll give you $100 if in 6 weeks, you can not smoke for 6 weeks." And like they'll like, hey, we've got employee gym on site and they'll form teams and get new people into it. And like, it literally bleeds across to everybody's personal lives. And you talk to the employees and they're like, coming to work here has been the best thing I've ever done in my life. I'm in so much better place because it's like that piece of the culture is without any like management leaders, like nobody's pushing any of this. That is just the reality of who the team is. And it just bleeds into everybody's lives across all aspects.
That's
freaking amazing. I mean, when you actually see it in practice, like it is just mind blowing, like to see the impact on people. Sorry, I'm cutting you off, but I'm excited.
It's because you said something I wanted to jump in with. There was a Steve Jobs quote that was that I forgot exactly what it was, but when people are excited about the work they're doing, they don't have to be told to do things. They don't have to be pushed to do anything because the vision pulls them. Something I wondered when I read the book is, at some point you do say that you wouldn't necessarily want other people to have the childhood you had, or to have had some of these experiences, particularly the harsher ones. But at the same time, I'm reading through this stuff, and the impression I got was that, so your life was pretty much in Technicolor, and a lot of people's lives, I struggled not to think that a lot of people's lives are sort of this uniform gray with the occasional spots of color, and there is this resistance against, taking more risks and living a life that's perhaps not always down the middle of the road. And there was this passage when I think you remember exactly what happened, but you go to live with your grandparents, right? So you go to live with your grandparents in Idaho, and it's not the longest of chapters. You said there wasn't a great deal happening. It was just, it was normal life for a bit.
Yep.
And so
I think that was kind of an interlude or something. I don't even think I called it a chapter in the book.
Yeah. And what I was thinking, so there's a whole bunch of ideas mixing together, but I was thinking that when you work with anyone, sort of a one-to-one type of thing, don't you sometimes get the impression that a lot of people, that's all they want, or that's all they're comfortable with? It's, living in Idaho with the grandparents, and all the other stuff that, has had a lot of value into building you into who you are. People are just never willing to go to those extremes.
It's human nature to try to seek comfort, right? Unfortunately, this is what I've learned in my life, right? Is that this is basic human physiology. And, I start with, telling it as a story as it relates to like training, but our mind, everything, our emotional resilience, all these things are the same way. We are human beings and we adapt to stress. We become more resilient. That's the process of building strength, right? So I use the words strength and resilience kind of interchangeably. And so everybody knows, like, if you break your arm and put it in a cast, what's going to happen? The process of atrophy starts happening. You take that cast off 3 months later and your arm's, small and withered up. It's basically the process that starts leading towards, I'm over speaking a little bit, but bring example to it, like the lack of actually having stress and adaptation in life starts leading towards the process of atrophy and death. And so this thing that we're always seeking and trying to find is the opposite of where we need to be almost. And it's all a point. And that's actually what that interlude or chapter was all about, was also articulating that you also do need to have rest and recovery. And it's this balance between those two. So like, if you're doing a CrossFit workout, twice a day, 7 days a week, you're going to fall apart. You're going to have bad knees. You're just not going to recover. Your sleep's going to go to crap. Your job and your life are going to start like getting impact. So it's all this balance, but we need to be able to have that. And it's in all aspects of our life. So the same thing comes with mental and emotional resilience and strength. Like, that's why we need to continue this process of challenging ourselves, to be able to find those things in life that scare us a little bit, but excite us at the same time, where you get that that feeling in your gut and it starts twisting a little bit up on you. And I think we all have this experience as we grow up, because some of these things are biological in nature and they force you to do this, as you're entering your teen years and you start making this transition away towards independence and a way of being cared for. That's is forcing you into these things. This drive to, find a partner. And so you're sitting there, imagine you're at a bar with
you're old school, Chris.
Your friends, and you're in your early 20s, and there's this, person across the way, and you're like, God, I really want to. And if we find comfort, the comfort thing is just to sit there. But at some point, there's this, those biological drives force us to go past that, to go chase the wow, it's scary. This person might reject me. It might be painful. It might be, but you've still got that drive to chase it. And then this is that process of how we go about, finding a partner and then a child and kind of going for these big things in life that are scary and exciting and hugely changing. But once we get through these natural drives and things, there's nowhere else after that. And that's where we start seeing a lot of this kind of leveling out in people's lives over time. And it's like they coast into this, I'm happy working my job Monday through Friday. It's like I dread, Sunday, I've got to go to work Monday. Can't wait till the weekend. And I'm like, and we roll into this where we're lacking this challenge and, this piece that's really driving us forward in life. And so that's where you've got to be purposeful. You've got to start actually seeking these things out. And it could be, hey, this other career opportunity or job that it's kind of scary. I don't know that I want to do, but when you feel like that fear, that mix of fear and excitement, that is telling you that's the path to go. And maybe maybe you won't be successful on that path. It doesn't matter. It's the practice of staying in it. That is your mental workout. That's your emotional workout. That's the things that are driving you. This is why people push you to read and, all these other things, because they're all these things that are challenging yourself to look at things from a different perspective or act in a different way that are going to continue to drive you to grow. So the opposite of death and atrophy is living. So to really live, that's where you've got to do is learn to be able to have this ability to take a step and move towards these things. I call it the practice of living in fear, because at the end of the day, you never know what's going to come at you. On some random Tuesday, a car could come out and hit you and completely change your life. A relative could die that, had a you ever see, people in your life where something happens, maybe it's a death, job loss, something major, and they can't respond. They kind of lock down. And they're unable to deal with this because they haven't developed the resilience to do this. They haven't been, that's the danger in this, right? And so anyway, this is my views on life. Maybe it doesn't fit everybody, and that's fine. But I throw it out there for people to really feel and live and try to understand the importance and connection of what it can have.
I think the workout analogy is one that it works really well to some extent, because you're right. I mean, 100% of people need the rest and the recovery. If we're talking about building muscle, that's what you do after you've caused all that physical stress.
You got to have both.
But you have to have the physical stress. It's not, yes, I'm resting and recovering. That's all you do. You actually have to go to the gym and try a bit hard sometimes. You can't just do the rest and recovery and hope for a miracle. And I think that when it comes to our personal lives, what a lot of people have gotten confused with, this is how I feel, is they think that being happy is being comfortable. Is things have to be easy. I think it's not the opposite. It's not that things have to be easy, is that you have to be up to them. So for example, this is perhaps a silly example, but one that to me illustrates that very well. I almost only take cold showers, freezing cold showers. So, the other day we had the water shortage in the house, or electricity shortage or whatever, and we didn't have hot water. I couldn't care less. Made no difference to me not because I like cold water, but because I'm prepared not to need it. I love a hot shower occasionally, but I don't need it. Whereas to my wife, this was a tragedy. I mean, this is her life was miserable for the, I think, week it took to sort the problem out, because she has no capacity to overcome that type of obstacle. And I think when I talk to friends of mine about work things now, a lot of things are changing with the way we work, right?
Oh yeah.
And if the way you work has to be the exact same way that it was 5 years ago and has no room, no give in it, then you might be constantly terrified, and not in a good way. You're not scared of this exciting challenge coming your way. You're terrified because if something changes, you're done for. Whereas I think it's not getting to a point that you're so good at this particular job that, or you made so much money that things are now great. It's like, well, no, they will change. Something will be thrown at me, but I can rise to the challenge. And I think that feeling of competency is where perhaps a slightly better type of happiness is than this sort of like contentment that a lot of people tend to settle for, and I think will bring them to a, if not an early grave, maybe I'm being dramatic, but at least to a less fulfilling life.
Those are perfect examples and great stories to tell around exactly the points that I'm trying to articulate there. And it's, go talk to anybody that's laying on their deathbed, right? And ask them about anything that they may have regretted about their life or what they've done. And you'll find that it's exactly that they didn't challenge, they didn't go after and do these things that they wanted to do that scared them. It's never been, man, I'm so happy I found this great, comfortable, easy life and just sat on the couch, watched my favorite shows and wrote it out, right? And for me personally, like I can't imagine not having challenged and chased the dreams and crazy things that I wanted to in life. It sounds so cliche because people say this all the time, but nobody, like a lot of people just don't step up and live it. They don't step up and do these sorts of things in their life. And you don't want to be in this position where you regret not doing something. We only have one life. And that's the part that I was saying, this sounds cliche, is you only have one life, and you do. Like, this is it right now. And it's a shame if you've got some ideas, some things that, to chase, that, to step up and do it. And if you fail, that's fine, because that process is the process of living, and it's going to make you stronger and more resilient for the next piece behind that. Yeah, contentment and comfort are not the end goal. The process of chasing those things and living that life that is, and that's why I use that workout analogy of the atrophy and death to resilience in life, because now if we apply that, we can say, hey, if we're not doing this, we're not really living. This is the human condition. And so that's really what I try to drive home, I think, in my book, as well as leadership, all these aspects. And it's very, very common. And you don't have to have had the experiences that I had to arrive at this conclusion, to live in this manner. But that's where I felt that the book was a great avenue to express those stories, because it's a great way to tell this and articulate that in a manner that is going to be both inspiring and motivating for people.
Yeah, there's something interesting you said at some point in the book where I think you compared the stories from your life and the experiences you had to old skins you'd shed, and how they no longer define who you are now. And I thought that was a very interesting, I'm not sure if this is a paradox, but it's this contrast between well, you just went and told a whole bunch of stories that make us understand you a lot more, but hopefully ourselves as well, and some truth about the world and about the human condition. But at the same time, you're saying you're not the stories.
That's not me, and that's part of why I never I decided to write the book and tell the stories to help articulate these messages. But for so long, that was a piece of why I didn't tell the stories, because that wasn't me. I am the person I am right now and who I'm presenting in front of you and who I've chosen to be and how I choose to live in the world today, right? And that stands on its own. Those are past experiences and things that may have fed into this, but I am the living, breathing version of who I choose to be in the world today, right now. And we get to make this decision every day of our life, right? Every moment of our life. And so when I tell the stories, it is literally like telling a story of some other thing and, other experience, another person. It is not the telling the story of who I am. And so this is a big disconnect. And we see this happen a lot because a lot of times if you ask a person who they are, they will tell you the story. They'll tell you the story of, I'm this way because my mom was an alcoholic. I am the person with a bad back that's going to be in pain for the rest of my life because XXX. I am this. And they're telling you a story of who I am because of what experience or what has happened to me. And that is not a definition of who you are. Those are things that definitely can have an impact on molding you, but you are your choices and actions around what you choose to do from those events. It's not what the event was. It's how you respond and the actions that you take. And that means you're in the driver's seat and you're choosing the life that you want to live. So like the book is The Eagle and the Dragon. It's broken in two pieces. The first piece is this, about understanding and finding your strengths in this world and what you can contribute. The second half, the dragon, is this purposeful deciding who you're going to be in this world and walking that path, the purposeful reinvention of oneself. And that is a really important, powerful thing to understand. So like in reflecting on those, my life, it really feels like lots of different lives in the past. Those are all different lifetimes than the world and the way and who I am right now.
And I can't help to mention that I can understand why you broke the book in two parts and called them The Eagle and the Dragon. But part of me wonders if you didn't call it The Eagle and the Dragon to get an excuse to show your cool tattoos on the cover of the book.
Well, it is a little of both.
And a dragon.
Yeah. It is literally because I had this giant. So for the listeners, if you look at my book, you'll see some of them, but I've got this two tattoos, but they basically cover my entire body. And the first half I had done around 20 years old when I was kind of leaving this crazy environment that I'd grown up in, kind of forging, who I was. And then the second one is this giant, Ouroboros dragon that encircles my whole upper body. And it's very prevalent because I'm shirtless a lot. Like I do a lot of video and photo content. And
what is that bare naked ladies line? I have a tendency to losing my shirt.
Yeah. So and I'm like, I want to look like a Viking king. We're gonna get this giant piece done. But well, that's what it looks like. But
well, listen, I can totally relate to that. I don't look like you, but when I was living in London for about 5 years, and in London everybody has the heating turned up all the time at home.
Uh-huh.
And then I remember one day, I think it was maybe a couple of years in, I had been living in this flat, and my flatmate looks at me and says, "There's something different about you. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something odd. There's like a haircut, no. Glasses, no. You wearing a shirt. The first time I've seen you wearing a shirt in 2 years." So yes, I feel you.
So yeah, the eagle is about
go.
The eagle is about soaring to whatever heights that you're capable of in life, and that's really where I was at that point. And then the second piece is this purposeful self-invention, reinvention of oneself. And this is when I was like at this very introspective period in my life where I was walking away from this amazingly successful career I had. I was walking away from my marriage. I was walking away from other certain friendships and relationships in my life. I was walking away from being a a competitive athlete where I was ranked number one in the world. I was making all this because I was like, I'm really successful, but I'm still not doing and living the way that I want. And it was really this piece of going, this is who and how I want to be in this world. And this is where the dragon, the Ouroboros comes in, this purposeful reinvention, the eating of the old and becoming the new, right? And so, I ended up reforging because I wanted to have passion in all aspects of my life. And I wanted to not just be happy from, leading people and helping them, accomplish more in the work world than they thought possible, but to be doing something that could significantly impact the world, that I could create this team environment and culture around this, to find passion in my personal life and in relationships, to be able to, I was living this great life, made a lot of money, living in a house with a white picket fence and going, these were all the things that I didn't think I'd be able to do when I was young. And I've proven to the world that here I am, I'm successful. But was I? That's the question. And so it took this big leap into the unknown in basically all aspects of my life. And I reformed my relationship, new marriage, reformed my relationship with how I interact in the physical strength sport world, reformed my business. I'm still doing this, but now I'm doing it in a way that is helping people live better and improving the quality of life and changing lives around the globe.
So what you're saying is, if I get a gigantic Ouroboros dragon tattoo, I can go to my wife and say, I need more passion in all aspects of my life. And that might be,
that's the story.
She might agree to that thing that I've been trying for years. Maybe, see, I'm committed to this thing. No, just one thing I wanted to throw on something we were talking about before. We got diverted on your shirtlessness and tattoos, which was, we were talking about how the stories you were telling, that they weren't you anymore. And I think there's a very important difference there that a lot of people don't get is, I don't tell a story or shouldn't tell a story to explain or to justify me. The story has to have a purpose, and that purpose shouldn't be a self-serving one. So I'm trying to make it easier for you to know me, or I'm trying to show you something I believe I've learned, and the best way to do that is to do it through a story. It's not, well, I'm sorry I'm an asshole, but let me tell you the story about my childhood, and then you understand why I'm an asshole. That's not the purpose.
Absolutely, and that's what I was trying to articulate, is that difference when people are telling a story and they're telling you how it's their environment is who they are, versus I chose to write my book and tell my stories as a way to articulate. I'm like, it is time, and I can use this to articulate these messages and philosophies that I hope to share, right? And it's been incredibly powerful. I mean, my book, the response, I mean, I can't tell you how many people that have emailed me, found ways to get call our company, like all these, like, that have not committed suicide, founded their own business, went back to school, I'll sound egotistical if I actually repeat what some of these, what some people have reached out to me to say, but it's been incredibly powerful. And I'm really thankful that I finally did step up and commit, because there's a big piece of being okay with, sharing some of this, the stories and pieces in this book. And I'm so glad that I did, because it allowed me to have this impact, because my companies, they affect the physical nature of this philosophy that I espouse. And I can't touch on those. They don't touch on those mental and emotional pieces. And that's what the book was for. And so, seeing that, I'm so thankful that I did share those stories and articulate and use that as a platform to articulate those messages and philosophies.
So, any more lifting records in the horizon, or you're done with that now?
That portion of my life has moved on. So that's kind of what the documentary is actually about. It followed through the completion of the 1,000-pound squat for reps, and kind of covers a little bit of the book, but also the reasoning behind I'm not pushing myself in that world anymore, but still pushing myself in other areas. So you'll have to see that when it comes out. It should be on Netflix and pretty much hopefully a lot of other places.
Cool. Is it going to be called The Eagle and the Dragon as well?
I think it is. I believe that's what the producer is going to go with, but I'm not. Cool. No, actually, no. I think. Sorry, I'm wrong. I was tying it to. I'm wearing my Grand Goals shirt.
The shirtless Viking.
Grand Goals, I think, is what he's going to go with.
Well, I will very much watch that when it comes out. And this was a pleasure. You reached out for us to speak a while back, and I didn't know exactly what we were going to talk about, but I actually had about 10 other things here I didn't come anywhere near close to touching. So yeah, I'm very, very glad we've done this.
All right.
And other than the book, which is called The Eagle and the Dragon, and it can be found pretty much anywhere books are found, and the documentary that will come out. If people want to find out more about you, there's plenty of places, but where do you want them to go first?
Yeah. An easy point, there's not a whole lot on my personal website, chrisduffin.com, but it links to all of my businesses. There's a link to there's a free download of the audiobook through that link. So it's got basically all the avenues to find me, all the social media. So it's pretty easy, chrisduffin.com.
And your social media handle is pretty amusing.
Yes, Mad Scientist Duffin is usually what I go by. You can just type my name into any social platform. I'll probably be the first thing that pops up. So I don't really get too particular about spelling all that stuff out. But yes, I'm known as the Mad Scientist for some reason, a little crazy.
The Mad Scientist of Strength, right?
Yes. Sorry. Mad Scientist of Strength. And that's on Instagram. So the two platforms that I'm on a lot, but the two ones that I actually interact with people on is Instagram and LinkedIn. So
basically, it's a very easy divide. Do you want to see Chris without a shirt on? Instagram. Chris with a shirt on? LinkedIn.
Perfect. So,
okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time again, Chris. This was a pleasure.
It was a great time. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves. And until next time. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a review or a rating on the Apple Podcasts app. It's very easy. You open the app and find this show. Then scroll down a little, and when you see the stars, tap. I'd really appreciate it, and it does help other people find us. And if you'd like to get in touch or find out more about what I do, reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit my website, storypowers.com.